Today we're going to be talking about happiness. We all want to be happy. We all try to be happy. We spend our lives in pursuit of happiness, and yet what we get is very little. Given the amount of energy we put in, and the amount of effort we put in, and the amount of struggle we put in, ask yourself, how much of that actually gives you happiness? You might enjoy your work, you might enjoy what you do, but rate it on a scale of your favorite things to do. Rate it on a scale of that which gives you the greatest happiness and the greatest bliss. And then ask yourself, how much of that are you experiencing? What would you rather have? What would you actually like to have? And to really understand the field of happiness further, we need to understand what is it that gives us happiness. What is it that causes happiness? So if you think about it for a little while, I encourage you to think about the moments where you felt the happiest. And you might say, well, it was a time where something happened, a day when I got married or engaged, where I met my partner, where we went on a wonderful date. It could be a day where I had my child, where we saw my kid walk or talk. It could be any one of these things. It could be an achievement you had at work. It could be a promotion you got. It could be a place you went to, and it could be something you bought. But in all of these, there's one thing that's common. And if you really think about what's in common with all of them, you might find out that it's something that had to happen outside of you. So something happened outside of you, and you felt happy inside of you. That's a very interesting phenomenon. What was it that caused the outside thing to cause the feeling of happiness inside? That's something we need to understand, because if we don't understand it, we're going to spend our entire life chasing something that we have no control over. It's going to depend upon that thing happening again. How often is it that you're going to have your child walk again, or your partner propose to you again, or your whatever it was? How often can you get that? If it was a vacation, how often can you go on vacation? Maybe you can go once a year, twice a year, 5 times a year, but how many days is that out of the year? Right? If you're spending a week, 2 weeks, a month on vacation in your favorite place, that's still a month out of a year. That's 30 days out of 365. And that's a tiny part of your life. And even there, you're going to have problems. Right? It doesn't mean every vacation is bliss personified. No. So, an external event has to occur for an internal experience to happen. Now, why is it that some things and some events cause happiness and others don't? Why is it that some people and not other people cause certain feelings, whether those are of love or of happiness or whatever else? Perhaps the answer lies in a very simple realization, and that is, when something happens the way I want it to, then I am happy. And when things don't happen the way I want, then I am unhappy. Think about that. Is it that anyone having that experience makes you happy? Or is it only when someone doing that thing to you makes you happy? Or getting that something? Is anyone getting a job or promotion make you ecstatically happy? Or is it when you get that job or promotion? See? And because you like that thing, because you desire that thing, because you want that thing, therefore when it happens you are happy. And when it doesn't, then you're unhappy. So I'd love to hear in the comments what you think about that, whether there's anything more to it. We're going to examine this topic in greater depth in the Bhagavatam. Narad has been talking to a king called Prachinabhari, and he's been giving him all kinds of knowledge on spirituality. And in the process, he's trying to get something across to the king, but the king's having a really hard time understanding. So Narad is simplifying it and simplifying it further and further and further, hoping that the king can somehow understand, because unless we understand spirituality deeply, it will not change our life. For it to change our life, we have to change how we think and how we perceive the world and how we understand things. Spirituality is an overhaul of our entire conditioning. And you'll see more of that as we go further. So the great sage, right? Great saintly person, great sage Narad Muni is having this conversation, and in this conversation he's telling the king, he says, that the living entity is exactly like a stray dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, his good luck, whatever you might say, he sometimes receives punishment. Some people kind of shoo him away, and others give him some food, maybe a little something. So the living entity, he says, is similarly influenced by so many desires. He wanders in so many different species of life according to his destiny, and sometimes he goes, might be in a rich family, and sometimes he might be in a poor family, and sometimes he might be well educated and sometimes not, and sometimes might be beautiful or handsome and sometimes not. Different bodies, different species, different circumstances. And we are wandering in all these circumstances, trying to fulfill our desires, but very rarely getting what we truly want. Another example he gives is that one may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he might sometimes get relief by shifting it onto the shoulder. Now when this does not relieve me, again you move it back to your head or back to another shoulder. But the only relief that can be gained is by taking the burden that you're carrying. In our case, it is survival, a burden of desires, the burden of pleasures that we seek, and take that burden and put it down, and try to find something that does not involve a burden, does not involve struggle, that does not involve having to give up so much of our time for something that gives so little return. And the third example he gives is when we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relieve it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awakening. So when you awaken, the dream is over. Similarly, spirituality has been compared to awakening. But when we awaken from the dream of material existence, of thinking that I am this body, I am this mind, this is me, when we awaken from that dream, then our suffering stops and there is a chance for true happiness. So, of course, when you say that I am not the body and I am not the mind, then the next question will come, of course, who am I? And then you begin to explore spirituality and you'll come to the understanding that I am the soul. I am the being, the person who inhabits the body and mind. I have a body, I have a mind. So like that. And as he begins to talk further, the king now continues instructing. Narad great sage keeps instructing the king, and he says, imagine a deer eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. He's enjoying the sweet singing of the birds and bumblebees, but he is unaware that in front of him there is a tiger, and behind him there is a hunter who is ready to kill him with sharp arrows. The deer's death is imminent. My dear king, the partner you desire, whether that's a woman or in the case of a woman it might be a man, who is very attractive in the beginning, is like a flower, which is attractive in the beginning but withers at the end. Both partners are entangled with lusty desires and to enjoy a life of sense gratification from the tongue to the genitals, just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. In this way, the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. And you might say, oh, this is not nice because he's telling me things that are, ask me to not feel good about my life. After all, I've been told all along that I need to fulfill my dreams. I need to be the best version of myself because then I can enjoy my life to the highest capacity. I need to make the most out of this life. I'm sorry, dear friend, we've been sold a lie. And that lie is that we can be happy in this world. That happiness can be found by pursuing it. That those who have the most are the happiest. And that somehow, if we try hard enough, we too might be happy. My answer to you, my challenge to you, is to take that idea and turn it around, re-examine it. Because it isn't true. I've seen this entire life of mine, people do exactly what we've been told and still come out unhappy. They've made a ton of money. They've got the partner of their dreams. They've attained and achieved everything. And so they're not happy. To understand it further, let's take a look at what the Bhagavad Gita says. In chapter 18, the final chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, text number 36 to 37, Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the three kinds of happiness which the conditioned soul enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. Okay? So think the three kinds of happiness which the conditioned soul, that's all of us, enjoys, and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. That which in the beginning may be like poison, but at the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. So he starts off with what real happiness is. That which may seem like poison, meaning that which seems difficult to do, hard work, struggle, but in the end is just like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. Now see, you might say this is true for everything. In everything it appears like hard work, and then, we get a reward at the end. No, but that reward isn't lasting. When you get your desire, you want the next thing. When you get that desire, you want the next thing. So you're constantly on a treadmill of wanting to get something, hoping that that thing will fulfill you. That's why he says, that which awakens you to self-realization is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. What is self-realization? When you realize who you are, the real self, the soul, like we were saying earlier. That you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're the soul. When you realize that, realize means you fully awaken to that experience. You not only experience it for a moment, you experience it consistently. Then he says, that happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. So happiness in the mode of passion appears to be like nectar in the beginning, like a lovely chocolate cake, right? Or anything else. Whether that's sexual pleasure, whether that is pleasure from drinking alcohol, whether that is whatever it might be. But the more you keep having of that, it turns to poison at the end. Right? Drink too much, eat too much, have too much sugar and sweet things, turns to poison. It now starts harming you, and the factor which was pleasurable now has turned into pain. So we say, oh no, just have a regulated amount. To regulate the amount is simply to give yourself less of the happiness that you are having. But what you don't realize is if you just keep on doing it, it turns itself into pain. It is not that you can keep doing this and keep enjoying it. See, happiness in the mode of goodness, which leads to self-realization, you can keep doing it for a minute, for an hour, for 10 hours, for a day, non-stop, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, your entire life, and the result will still be the same. It will never turn from unhappiness to happiness. It will stay always happiness. There will be a little struggle period in the beginning as you're practicing and learning how to do it. But then self-realization happens. And when that happens, happiness is consistent for the rest of your life. And then he says there's a third kind of happiness, which is called happiness in the mode of ignorance. And that happiness, which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. So, completely closed and shut off to self-realization. And which is derived from sleep, laziness, and illusion. Illusion meaning, oh, I want to be stoned, I want to be high, I want to be drunk, I want to be... That's where my happiness is. Right? I just want to play video games all day long. All of that is happiness in the mode of ignorance. And it doesn't really make one happy. I read someone who commented on this and said, happiness that arises because of satisfaction coming from repeated practice, not a sudden appearance of satisfaction, as when you get some kind of pleasure from the senses. That is what they're talking about in the mode of goodness. In the beginning it appears to be a struggle or poison when you try to meditate. And it might seem hard to sit, or it might seem hard to focus the mind. But when you realize that the soul is distinct from the body, this same practice becomes sweet like the falling of streams of nectar with the attainment of samadhi from realizing the soul. This happiness arises from intelligence which has been purified by concentrating on the true self. So really think about it. I really want you to take a good hard look at your own life and look at how are you spending your time and where can you create a shift and how you can begin to change things around for yourself. This is not a judgment. This is not a criticism. This is simply putting things into perspective and saying, okay, where do you stand? Do a self-evaluation and then decide what it is you want to do from here. Narad continues, the living entity forgets that before him, so he was giving that analogy, right, of the tiger, and he was talking about how there's this deer, and then on one hand there is a tiger, and on the other hand there is a hunter. The living entity forgets that before him is time. So that analogy was for us, regarding us, that we forget that on one side there is time which is taking away our lifespan with the passing of day and night. The living entity does not see that the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about death, who is trying to kill him from behind. He says to the king, try to understand this, you are in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. My dear king, become fully conscious of yourself and give up the ideas of bettering your life through karmic activity. I think we can all learn a lot from this advice. Give up the ideas of bettering your life through karmic activity. What is karmic activity? Karmic activity is that which we do so that we can enjoy the fruits of our work, the fruits of our action, or that is karmic activity. But those same activities are done as an offering to the divine, to God. They are spiritual activities. The same activity, the same job, the same thing that you do, the house that you have, the family that you have. When you devote them to God, when you do them as an offering to God, this family is yours, this house is yours, this Work I do for you. Everything I do it for you. Right? So he says, give up household life and take shelter of the Supreme Godhead through the mercy of liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. So what Narada is trying to tell him is that we're all attracted to material existence. We're attracted to the pleasures of the world. But these are like impostors that are stealing our life. They are stealing away our days and nights. They are taking away the most precious thing we have, and that is time and this life and this body. I say, oh, I'll do it later. Later when I'm older, then I'll focus on spiritual things. Then I will devote myself to God. No, that later never comes. You begin now. You begin devoting yourself now. You begin committing yourself now. Because when you're older, you're not strong enough. You're not capable enough. Your body is hurting. You're going through all kinds of disease. You're going through old age. It's very hard at that time. I've seen so many elderly people. And it doesn't happen unless you have practiced throughout your life. And really, what are you practicing? You're practicing giving up the false. What is the false? The false is that this is mine, this body is mine, these things are mine, this family is mine. That's the false thing, because nothing is mine. Nothing. Nothing at all. It was here before you came into the scene, and it will be here after you leave. The world, I mean. And therefore, how can it be yours? If it was yours, you'd take it with you when you die. But you don't. Nobody does. Not even the richest person on earth has been able to do that one. They all died and left it all behind. So if that is the case, then nothing is mine. Then whose is it? It belongs to the Creator. So why not take the very thing that belongs to the Creator and say, hey, this is yours. You're not saying a lie. You're simply saying that is actually the absolute truth. And having said that, how may I serve you using this? How may I use this in your service? You'll still be living in that house, you'll still be enjoying all those things, but now it will be as an act of service, as an act of devotion, not only to God, but to all beings. Whoever is willing to honor that space, whoever is wanting to learn from you, and wherever it is you wish to share. So the king, hearing this wisdom, was awakened. And he said to the great sage Narad, he said, my dear Narad, whatever you have said I have heard with great attention, and considering all of it have come to the conclusion that those who taught me to engage in karmic activity did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me? I don't know if you had that feeling ever. But I've always wondered, why is it my family, my teachers, the people I knew and loved and cared for so much all my life, why were they not able to help me? The truth, of course, was no one helped them. Nobody taught them. So how were they going to teach me, and how were they going to tell me that which they did not know? But that is why we have great saintly people like Narad Muni, people who have come, and who I've met so many such people as well. And through them we learn. And then the hope is to pass it on to others. So now he goes on, the king goes on, he says, you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered about the real purpose of life. Then he has a question. He says, I have a question. It can be observed that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work, which you did in a previous lifetime, in a different body? Right? So let me explain this to you a little more clearly. You engage in certain activities, karmic activities, good or bad, right? So there will be good and bad karma. Some of that you will experience in the same life. Some of that you may not experience in the same life. And it will be experienced in another life. Now he's saying, how does it carry over like that? The body in which that karma was done is dead and lost. So how can it carry over? How is that possible? Narad explained, The living entity inhabits a material body. Inhabits. The body is forced to act by the subtle body, which is composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. So the body is being forced to act by these three: mind, intelligence, and ego. These three combine together to form what is called the subtle body. Now here again, this is not the gross body. This is not the brain we're talking about. This is not the physical body. This is the mind, intelligence, and ego. They form the subtle body. After the material body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus there is no change. So the subtle body does not die with the physical body. The subtle body, in fact, when the soul leaves the body, the subtle body goes with it. That is the mind, intelligence, and ego. He says the living entity, the soul, while dreaming, gives up the present body. So this, what we call living, is actually dreaming, according to the enlightened beings. So the living entity, the soul, while dreaming, that is what we call living, gives up the present body. His subtle body takes him to another body, either as a demigod or a dog, or an animal, on this planet or another. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. So, think about it. Why were you born in a certain family, in a certain country, with a certain kind of body, with a certain kind of intelligence, with a certain kind of ability? All of that is because your subtle body brought that information to you. All of that is the result of your previous karma, good or bad. That would have determined what you had in this life. Your karma is like your bank balance. Your bank balance determines what kind of house you will buy. It determines what kind of clothes you will have, what kind of car you will have. Your bank balance is vital. Your karmic bank balance is what determines what kind of birth you will have, what kind of family and country and situation you'll be born into. Narad continues, the living entity labors under the conception of I am this, I am that, my duty is this, and therefore I shall do that. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of God, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions by getting one body after another. Sometimes we inexplicably experience something that was never experienced in the present body, by sight or hearing. So for example, when I've done past life regressions with people, I've noticed that if that person came to me with a fear of heights, or of the dark, or swimming, or so many things, when we went back in time, perhaps into a different lifetime, and we saw what actually occurred at that time, that fear would go away. So very often, just by becoming aware of the cause, the origin of a particular fear, that fear would disappear. So it's very interesting what he's saying here, that it's inexplicable that we're having a certain experience, we're getting triggered a certain way, even though there's no reason and no cause we can understand in this life. I came across a particular case where someone was had died. Their village had been drowned in a tidal wave, and when that village was drowned, everybody died. It was dark, and so this person had a fear of water and had a fear of the dark. You see, it's when they became aware of that, those fears went away. And you're able to put it in perspective that it happened in that time, it's not happening now. Sometimes in a dream we see things we never experienced or heard in this life, but all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body. It's a subtle body, the mind, intellect, and ego. According to one's mental composition, one can understand that the living entity, rather what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus the mind indicates the past and future bodies. Going back to a reference in the Bhagavad Gita, it says in chapter 8, text number 8, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajati ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti kaunteya sadatad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Whatever state of being one remembers when one quits his body. So what is your state of mind, your consciousness? What is your consciousness? The aggregate state of your being. Meaning, you've heard the story about how when people are dying, they remember their whole life. It flashes by in front of them. And that summary of their life, which flashes by in their life, creates a certain level of consciousness. That is the consciousness of that person. That aggregate level of consciousness that you have been having in this life will determine the next life, will determine where you will go in the next life. So it's not that someone's punishing you, it's not that someone is blessing you, it's that you made certain choices during the course of this life, whether that was to help others or harm others, whether that was to use this life for spirituality or waste this life. Whatever it was you did, that determines your consciousness at the time of death. And that in turn determines what kind of body you will have in the next life, and what kind of situation you will be born into. Everything that you're doing, every thought, every deed, is determining what is going to happen next, in the next moment, and the next moment, and ultimately in the next life. As long as there is desire and karma, the subtle body, that is the mind, intelligence, and ego, will continue from one body to another, giving rise to different experiences, life after life. This is known as the transmigration of the soul. As the soul becomes subjected to different types of so-called enjoyment, lamentation, fear, and unhappiness. Narad gives the example. He says the caterpillar transports itself from one leaf to another by capturing one leaf before giving up the other. Similarly, according to his previous work, the living entity must capture another body before giving up the one he has. This is because the mind is the reservoir of all desires. As long as we desire to enjoy our senses, or sense gratification, we create material activities. When the living entity acts in the material field, he enjoys the senses. And while enjoying the senses, he creates another series of material activities. In this way, the living entity becomes entrapped as a conditioned soul. I hope you're starting to see something here, that our desires lead to attempts to enjoy the senses. Those attempts to enjoy the senses in turn lead to more need for desire, and more needs and more desires, and that perpetuates the cycle of birth and death. We keep on and on and on trying, never succeeding, continuing like a deer in the desert looking for water, looking for happiness and never finding it. He continues saying, cosmic manifestation is created, maintained, and annihilated by the will of the Supreme Godhead. Everything is under his control. To be enlightened by this perfect knowledge, one should always engage himself in serving the Divine or God. Constant association with the Supreme Godhead allows one to observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as he does. This is also known in today's time as witness consciousness. So you see, by associating with the Supreme Godhead, by the Divine, how do you do that? Through meditation, by experiencing yourself, and by experiencing how this energy is all pervasive, how God is all pervasive in everywhere, in everything, in everyone. And in experiencing that, and by serving God, you begin to develop the same vision as God. To observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as he does. After instructing the king in this way, Narad returned to the planet where he lives, called Siddhaloka. planet of the liberated beings. The king, in the presence of his ministers, left orders for his sons to protect the citizens. He then left home and went off to undergo austerities in a holy place known as Kapil Ashram. There, with sober and unfaltering mind, he engaged in the loving service of Govinda, or Krishna, and attained liberation from all material designations and a spiritual position qualitatively equal to that of God. It's very important to understand what is being said here. He attained liberation from all material designations. What are the material designations? When we think that we are male or female, when we are thinking we are a king or a pauper, whether we think we are smart or stupid, these are all material designations. So giving up that egoic sense of who you are. He attained liberation from material designations. So it's not just that he gave up the material things of the world, but even the identification with them. Even the sense of being identified with this body or this mind. All of that. Some people just give up the world, but when they give up the world travels with them. They still have their mind, intelligence, and ego. It's still there, and it's still got a hold of them, and it's still controlling how they do things. Even if they go and live in an ashram or they go and live in a monastery, they haven't yet given up. They may have given up the world, but the world hasn't been purged out of them. They're still stuck there, wanting to control things, wanting to own things, wanting to be someone, wanting to show, look, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I've achieved. I did this. No, my dear friend, nothing, none of that is true. What is true is this: we are infinitesimal, we are tiny fragments of the divine of God. And the more we understand this, the more we develop humility, compassion, kindness, and love. The more we annihilate the ego, the more we become free. What does it mean to annihilate the ego? It simply means to develop and cultivate humility. How do you develop and cultivate humility? By serving God. There can be no arrogance when you really truly understand that I am here to serve humanity, to serve all creatures, to serve God. I'm just here for that. Other than that, I have no identity other than that. That is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said. Jivera Swarup hoy, Nitya Krishna Das. That the Swarup, our Swarup, meaning our original form, our original constitutional position or our original identity is not either as male or female or as rich or poor or smart or stupid, but our real identity, our Swarup, our soul's identity, another way of saying it, is Nitya, eternally, Krishna or God, Das, servant, eternal servant of God. In the Bible, Christ says the same thing: the greatest amongst you shall be the least, and the servant to all. Same thing. A desire to maintain body, wife, and children is also observed in the animal kingdom. The animals have full intelligence to manage such affairs. If a human being is simply advanced in this respect, what is the difference between him and an animal? One should be very careful to understand that this human life is attained after many, many births in the evolutionary process. The Vedas say there are 8,400,000 species of life, of which about 400,000 are different types of human species. So, yeah, it's a very rare occurrence that we are human beings. And if we misuse this human form of life by not cultivating our spirituality, then we're destined to lose it. Yeah, it's very important, this life. They give the example of how we're sitting in a very precarious condition where, like the hunter, right, or the deer with the hunter on one side and the tiger on the other. So death is waiting for us. Time is on the other side. And between them we're being squashed. The Bhagavatam continues. It says, everything happening within time, which consists of past, present and future, is merely a dream. That is the secret understanding in all Vedic literature. So, what does this mean? Everything happening within time, which consists of past, present and future, is merely a dream. So if everything that's happening is a dream, then what are we doing? We're in this dream, so caught up. At least we need to start waking up and see that it's a dream. That's the starting place. And once we start seeing that it's a dream, then we realize, so, okay, well, what's reality then? What's life beyond the dream? That's when you start waking up. When you start asking questions like that. And then he continues here, if a living entity is developed in God consciousness or Krishna consciousness and is merciful to others, and if his spiritual knowledge of self-realization is perfect, he will immediately attain liberation from the bondage of material existence. This narration certainly sanctifies the material world. One who hears it, explains it to others, will be liberated from material bondage and will no longer have to wander within this material world, because it purifies the heart of the living entity and helps him attain spiritual identity. So, with that, I'd love to hear your questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to know what you thought of all of this. It's been a very enlightening reading, and there's a lot to be learned here. So my questions to you are, what have you learned, what have you understood, and let's talk about it. If any of you have any questions, please write them down, and I'd love to answer your questions. Nothing so far. All right. Well, I have a question for you then. How can you determine the best way to live? What are you going to do from here? What are you taking away? What are you learning? What are you understanding? Either put it in the questions or the comments. Let me know. I'd like to know your thoughts. Does this make any sense to you? Do you realize what happiness really is and where it can be found? There's this beautiful little story where I talk about how God wanted to take happiness and hide it. Why do you want to hide it? Because I want people to know the real thing, and the real thing must be precious, and the real thing must be something that they truly value and cherish. Okay? So therefore it should be hidden. Okay, where would you hide such a thing? After all, everybody wants to be happy. And it's a little story, of course. And so they tried to hide it and talked about hiding in different places, the bottom of the ocean, top of a mountain. Oh no, human beings will go wherever you try to hide it. Said, okay, finally it was decided we'll hide it within themselves, because they'll never look there. Now, of course that's a story, but what I want to bring out is this, that it's the last place we are willing to go to. There's some truth in the story. It's the last place we are going to, because in fact, the thing we seek is already here. The happiness we seek, the love we seek, the fulfillment we seek, the contentment we seek is already right here within us. It is the most important part of us. It is the soul. It is the part of us that enters this body and gives it life, and then it leaves the body at the time of death. It is who we are. And it cannot be found in the outer world. That which we seek cannot be found. That impulse that we have to look for happiness is an impulse to look for ourselves. It's an impulse to look for our soul. It's an impulse to find God. Because that is the reservoir, the fountainhead, the source of all happiness. One who has found God has found everything, has found the greatest treasure in the world. And that's my invitation to you. You can do it as well as anyone else can. Alright, is there anything else you'd like to bring up? Okay, well, it hasn't come up now. Let it be in the comments. If you think later about something, put it down there. And I'll answer you at any point. Do know that I will answer all comments, and I'd love to hear from you. Last chance, if anyone who's on the live program wants to ask anything, please feel free to do so. Okay. Alright. Have a wonderful night, and I will see you next week. Take care. Jai Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna.